environment enrichment programme that we run here at the sanctuary. At the end there will be an opportunity for you to follow the feeds and talks this afternoon. Our series of feeds and talks start at 2 o'clock, and if you do follow those along you will see us doing the different types of training with the different creatures that we have here at the sanctuary. So most of the training that we do is with our seals. We do some training with our otters and our penguins as well, but the majority of the training that we do here at the sanctuary is with our seals. Now the different types of seals, different types of training that we do. There are some that we can get much closer to than others. With our grey seals, they're part of the true seal family. They have the internal ears and they move along on their bellies, and they're not anywhere near as quick as our sea lions, and so because of that it means that we can go a lot closer to them and we can do a lot more hands-on work with them. So we do target training with our grey seals. We use target sticks, which is a stick about 2 feet long with a blue end to it, and we ask the boys to lift their noses up to touch the target stick and hold that position. While they've got their noses up in the air, we can check right down the full length of their neck and throat, just make sure that they're nice and healthy. We then ask them to maintain a hold position with their nose touching the target stick, lying really nice and flat for us. When they're lying nice and still in that position, we can work right down the full length of their body. We can check their side flippers, working right through, lifting them up, spreading them out, checking their claws and their flippers on either side, and their rear flippers and their tails as well. So we can give them a really thorough check over. Pressure right down the spinal column, and the reason that we do that is it's along the spine that we would take any blood samples from. So not only does it mean that we get to do a regular husbandry check on our seals to make sure that they're healthy, but it does mean that if the vets ever need to come and do any work with them, it's not something they'll find stressful because it's part of their daily work here with us at the sanctuary. And we do that normally 2 or 3 times a day. And while we've got them there, we'll also obviously check their little internal ears, we'll check their eyes, and we'll just give them a really thorough once over just to make sure that they haven't incurred any knocks or bumps. If they have incurred any injuries, we do have a seal at the moment, Marlin. He's unfortunately been caught by one of the larger seals. Their claws caught him along his back, and he does have a bit of a gash down his back at the moment. We just get an antiseptic spray, a bit like a purple spray that you'd use on a horse or something. They have a green antiseptic spray, and when they're out of the water on the haul out area and we're doing their training with them, at that time we can easily just give them a quick antiseptic spray just to make sure that as the wound's healing there's no infections or anything from the water that we use. So that's the daily training that we do with our grey seals. With our fur seals, it's a little bit different. Our fur seals were trained as performing seals at their previous home, so they are quite feisty. We can't really go into their enclosure with them. If we try and go in, they have a tendency to steal our buckets, dive off down into the water with them. They get their food, we don't get to do their training, and then we end up with a colander instead of a bucket back at the end of the day. So we don't go in with them, we feed from the enclosure next door, and we ask the boys to come out onto the haul out area up by the big glass panels that we have around the enclosure. We'll ask the boys to come over and we'll do target training, but not with the target sticks. On this occasion, the animal care team will use a fist, and they'll ask the boys to target their nose against different points on the glass. When we're doing our training with them, we ask them to do an instruction. When they've carried it out successfully, they get a short blast of the whistle to let them know that we're happy with what they've done, and then they get their fish as a reward. But we do different points on the glass, asking them to put their noses against it. We'll ask them to go down onto the floor and lie nice and still with their nose against the glass and hold that position. The animal care team will make their way back and walk all the way around the sides, giving them a really thorough check from all the angles. Then they'll ask them to come up and stand up for us. Now, because of our fur seals are part of the eared seal family, they're the same family as our sea lions, so they have those great big front flippers that can support their full body weight. So they turn their rear flippers out to act as stabilisers, put their big front flippers up against the glass and stand up in a nice upright position. We'll then ask them to open their mouths and hold that position so we can check their teeth and their gums. We flick near each of their eyes, which is a way of pretending to administer eye drops. You will notice with a lot of our seals, one of the things with seals is as they get older, eyesight does become a problem. Cataracts are very prevalent in seals, and just general bad eyesight. They do get infections, and by doing this training on a daily basis, one of our fur seals, Andy, did start to suffer with a couple of minor eye infections this year, but because of the training we do, it meant that as soon as the first sign of an eye infection, 3 times a day we could administer his eye drops. He was caused no stress at all, and the infection cleared up really nice and quickly. Because they're eared seals, we can also check their ears while they're up in that position. And then we sometimes get the target sticks and just run it down the length of their body so they get used to having that touching feeling down their bodies, just so they're getting more and more used to being touched and having that hands-on work that we do with them. We'll also ask the boys to lie down nice and flat, and we'll then ask them to lift each of their flippers in turn, and that means that we can check right down the underside of their body to make sure that they haven't incurred any knocks or bumps. And not only do we work with the boys up on the side, but we also send them down into the pool as well, and we'll ask them to make their way to different stations around the pool so that we can get a thorough check on how they're moving and how they're working around in the water. And we sometimes use the target sticks with our fur seals just to throw them down the length of the pool, and the boys collect them and bring them back and hand them back to us. Now, it's because of that sort of training that when we had a little boy who dropped his hat into the pool one day this summer, all the animal care team had to do was come over, ask Chaff to go down into the water. He went straight down into the pool, picked it up in his mouth, jumped straight out onto the haul out, stood up against the glass and handed the hat back to the animal care team. So they are really, really well behaved and very, very well trained, and they're so willing to do anything that you might ask of them. So that's the training that we tend to do with our fur seals. Now, the only difference with our fur seals compared to the other seals that we have here is they were originally housed at Combe Martin Wildlife Park, and there they were trained as performing seals. They came here to live out the rest of their days in retirement here with us at the sanctuary. At 21 years of age, Andy's getting a little bit older now, but at just 11 years of age, Chaff is still very, very young. So from our point of view, for any animal in captivity, it's really, really important they're kept as mentally stimulated as possible. We have the pools so that they can move around and they can be physically active, but to keep them mentally stimulated, we do allow Chaff to do some of his performance training as well. Whether we ask him to or not, if he thinks it's been too long between his fish, he might throw in a quick bark for us or a little dance from flipper to flipper, or he might give you a quick salute or something, ever hopeful that he might get an extra fish or two. And rather than just have him do that as just him doing it for his own pleasure, we would rather encompass that into his daily training. So we're actually asking him to do these things, so it's part of his training to keep him as mentally active as possible. So we do throw that in for him as well. So that covers our fur seals, and the only other ones that we do a lot of training with are our sea lions. Now, our sea lions are very small at the moment compared to how big they will get. Andre is our Californian sea lion. He's really, really cheeky. He came to us from Chessington World of Adventures because he was causing so much problem when they were trying to do training with all of their other seals there. So they asked us if we would take him on, and he's in there with two big Patagonian sea lions. Now, our Patagonian sea lions currently weigh in at 190 kilos each. When they're fully grown, they'll weigh 400 kilos each. So you're talking about an awful lot of sea lion, and that's why it's so important that we do the training with them at the moment. Not only so that we can get a regular husbandry check on them, but so as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, we can still go in and do hands-on close-up work with them like we do at the moment. So we want to develop that as much as possible. So we do the same work with them as we do with our fur seals, but we're actually in the enclosure with them. So we'll ask the boys to come out of the water and come up to the side, and we'll ask them to stand up at the sides. We then feel right down the full length of their body, stroking them, getting them used to being touched. We'll check their heads and their faces. We'll ask them to open their mouths so we can check their teeth and their gums. We'll ask them to lift their flippers up, and we often have them right in front of us, and we'll ask them to lift a flipper, and then we hold the flipper in the air for them, and then ask them to do the same on the other side. So we do very close hands-on work with those guys. And we do have to remember all the time that they are wild animals, and at the slightest hesitation they can turn on you. So it is very, very important that we're very aware of what's going on around us. And when we're doing training with any of our animals, when we're in the enclosures, we always have one of the brooms with us, just so that we have something to use between us and them if they decide that they're going to get a bit feisty. So just that we have the animal care team can safely enter and leave the enclosure when they're working with them. Our sea lions are trained to stay down in the water. They get really excited coming up to dinner time, but part of their training is to tell them they have to stay down in the pool, and they can only come out onto the haul out area when the animal care team enter the enclosure. They'll give them a blast of the whistle. They'll then come up out of the pool, and they have their set stations. So Andre's always on the left hand side, Nuito's always in the centre, and Diego is always on the right hand side. Now, those boys have had a really steep learning curve as young pups. When they were housed in Valencia in Spain, they learned all of their training in Spanish. they came here to the sanctuary and they've had to relearn all of their training in English. Now that means that we're really proud to have bilingual sea lions, but it just gives you an idea just how intelligent they are, that they can move between one language and another. Obviously the hand signals that we give them are still the same as they would have used when they were young pups, but they are slowly starting to learn the vocal commands as well. Now with our sea lions, because they're all still very young, 2 of them are 5, 1 of them's 4, but they're still incredibly young, effectively just in their teenage years. Not only do we do the training with them out on the haul out area, but we also ask the boys to go down into the water, and the animal care team will often go into Sea Lion Cavern, which is our underwater viewing, and the boys will come down into the windows down there, and we'll do target training with them underwater as well. They're learnt to blow bubbles for us against the glass when they're in there. They'll hang right upside down for you, right in front of the glass, and hold that position nice and still underneath the glass, under the water, and we do a lot of work with them down in the pool as well. So that's the hands-on training that we do with our animals here at the sanctuary. But we also have our environment enrichment program, which is just other things that we encompass into their daily work, just to keep them as interested as possible and make their lives as happy as we can. We have pallets in each of our enclosures. They're trained to climb on and off the pallets. That's a way of being able to weigh the seals. They're trained to climb on and off of them. Then when we want to weigh them, we put a couple of weigh bars underneath the pallet, ask the boys to climb on and off, and that means that we can get a regular check of their weight. So that's something else that we do. We also put different toys in their enclosures for them to play with. At the moment, our convalescent pool's got the rubber ring in it, and Atty and Ray specifically absolutely love that. And they'll often be found hanging in the ring with their heads underwater, just using it as a buoyancy aid to keep them up on the surface. But they'll play in that for hours on end. Up in our common seal pool, Siege's favourite toy of the year has been her raft. And we had a wooden raft floating around in the middle of the pool all summer. Unfortunately, she loved it so much, she spent so much time climbing off and on and off of it, that it's now started to rot away. So we've had to take it out of the enclosure, and our site maintenance team are currently building her a brand new raft to go in there for her. When we took her raft away, we were really worried that she'd be upset because she didn't have her toy anymore. So she had a rowboat put in there instead. We were donated a rowboat by a visitor here at the sanctuary. Unfortunately, that was even more fun for her, because not only could she climb into it, but she could fill it up with water. So she kept sinking it down to the bottom of the pool, and the animal care team kept having to go in, fish it out of the pool, drain it out, but she's now split right up the centre of it. So she hasn't got that to play with anymore. But to give you an idea of how playful they are, we have seen the girls making their way up and out of the water and using their noses to try and nudge the boat back down into the pool so that they can carry on playing with it. So they are very playful and fun-loving. Now the animal care team often at feeding times will bring the guys feed balls, just like you use on dogs and hamsters and all other sorts of things. We have great big feed balls with lots of different holes in them, and we put a lot of their fish in there for them and then just lob them into the pool, and the boys will pounce on them and take them down under the water and play with them until they can get the fish out. And again, it's just part of their enrichment. It just means they have to work a bit harder for their food. Out in the wild, they would spend 14 to 16 hours a day hunting for their food, and obviously here in captivity we just go in and we feed them, so they don't have all that stimulation throughout the day. So by doing things like putting feed balls in for them and things, it just means that they have to work a bit harder for their dinner on a daily basis.